She's a virgin, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. You can take her as your mistress, my prince. When you are tired of her, you can return her to me, so I can marry her off. I I couldn't get the money. Once upon a time, in a kingdom called Mbala, nestled among the lush green mountains of the east, and surrounded by sparkling blue rivers, there lived a joyful community of villagers. Life in Mbala was peaceful and filled with beauty, and among these cheerful villagers was a young man named Obika. Obika was no ordinary villager. He was strikingly handsome and admired by everyone in the kingdom. His charm was unmatched only by his hard work, and he was well known as one of the most promising young men in Mbala. Obika grew up under the loving care of his mother Obiageli, a strong and kind woman who raised him all by herself after the death of her husband. Despite her challenges, Obiageli refused to remarry, saying that her greatest joy was raising her son to be a good man. Inspired by his mother's sacrifices, Obika vowed to make her the happiest woman in the world. Their family was blessed with acres of fertile land and countless palm trees. From a young age, Obika threw himself into farming. While other boys in the village spent their days playing in the forest or splashing waters in the streams with the giggling village girls, Obika was on his farm, planting seeds, harvesting crops and caring for the land. He worked tirelessly, knowing he had a duty to provide for his mother and honor the love she had poured into raising him. By the time Obika turned 25, his efforts had paid off immensely. He owned large bands of yams, a herd of cattle, and one of the finest huts in the entire village. His farmland stretched far and wide, bursting with healthy crops. The villagers often whispered about his success, calling him the pride of Mbala. Obika's mother, Achalugo, couldn't have been prouder. Every time she looked at her son, her heart swelled with joy. She would often sit quietly in their compound, thanking the gods and blessing Obika with prayers for a long and prosperous life. But as the years passed, Achalugo began to worry. She was growing older and weaker, and though she was grateful for everything Obika had done, she longed to see him settle down with a wife. She believed he needed someone to share his life with, someone who could help manage his wealth and bring him happiness. So one quiet evening, after they had finished dinner, Achalugo decided it was time to talk to her son about her wish. She called him to sit with her under the large mango tree in their compound. The evening air was cool, and the moon cast a soft glow over the yard as she began to speak. Obika, my son, she said, her voice gentle but firm. You've been such a good son to me. Even as a boy, you promised to take care of me, and you've kept that promise. You've done so much, and for that I am forever grateful. Obika smiled warmly. Thank you, Mama. I am happy to make you proud. But he could tell there was more on her mind. Achalugo leaned closer, her tone becoming serious. My son, she continued, there is one more thing I want to ask of you. I am getting older, and my strength isn't what it used to be. I want to leave this world knowing you have someone by your side. I want you to get married, Obika. I want you to find a good woman who will stand by you, care for you, and share in your success. Obika was taken aback. He hadn't expected this conversation. He let out a small laugh. Mama, is that why you're looking so serious? But Achalugo shook her head. I'm not joking, Obika. I mean it. If you truly want me to be happy, promise you'll bring a wife home soon. You work too hard, and you need someone who can take care of you in ways I cannot as your mother. Obika looked at her, seeing the sincerity in her eyes. Though the idea amused him at first, he couldn't ignore how much this meant to her. Don't worry, Mama, he said, his voice gentle. I will do as you say. Hearing those words, Achalugo's face lit up with a radiant smile, her heart feeling lighter, knowing her son had promised to honor her wish. All she wanted was for him to be happy and surrounded by love, just as he had always made her feel. The truth was, Obika had already been thinking of settling down. His heart had been quietly stolen by a maiden who worked on his farm alongside her aunt. Her name was Asamma. From the very first day Obika set eyes on her, he felt something he couldn't explain. Asamma was a definition of beauty. Her every feature seemed crafted with care by the gods. Her smooth, radiant skin glowed under the sunlight, and when she smiled, it was as if the entire world came to its standstill. For the first time in his life, Obika found himself truly drawn to a woman. Though he tried to focus on his work, he often caught himself stealing glances at her. Obika hadn't approached her yet, but she was always on his mind. Each evening, as he sat at Mama Ekene's palm wine joint with his closest friend Emeka, the conversation inevitably turned to Asamma. Emeka, Obika would say, his face lighting up with a boyish grin. You need to see how beautiful Asamma is. Her smile. It does something to me. Emeka, the ever-practical one, would laugh and shake his head. Obika, my friend, you better tell her how you feel before someone else does. A maiden like that won't stay unnoticed for long. Mbano, that can't happen, Obika would reply, rejecting the very thought with a laugh. But deep down, Emeka's words stayed with him. He couldn't bear the thought of losing Asamma to another man. For weeks, Obika had been thinking about marrying Asamma. He knew he wanted her to be his wife, but how could he approach her? How could he tell her how deeply he felt about her without scaring her away? Then, one day, the perfect opportunity presented itself. It was late in the afternoon when Obika noticed Asamma wasn't looking well. She had fallen ill while working on the farm, her energy drained from the heat and hard labor. Seeing her struggle, Obika didn't hesitate. He rushed to her side, gently helping her sit under the shade of a tree. He fetched water for her, made sure she rested, and even roasted some yam for her to eat. Obika's kindness touched Asamma deeply. She couldn't help but smile at the way he cared for her, his actions speaking louder than any words could. From that day, they began to talk, and as they spent more time together, their bond grew stronger. Obika discovered that Asamma wasn't just beautiful. She was kind-hearted, hardworking, and full of wisdom. With her, he felt a happiness he had never known before. A few months later, with the blessings of their families, Obika and Asamma were married in a grand celebration. Achalugo, Obika's mother, was overjoyed. On the day of the wedding, she couldn't stop smiling. Asamma was everything she had hoped for in a daughter-in-law: graceful, loving, and dedicated. The gods have truly blessed me, Achalugo said, her voice full of gratitude as she watched her son and his new wife exchange their vows. Obika and Asama's marriage became the talk of Mbala. Their love for each other was evident in everything they did. Obika adored his wife so much that he treated her like a royalty. He rarely let her feet touch the ground, always ensuring she was cared for and protected. They were inseparable, often seen walking hand in hand to the stream, laughing and chatting as if they didn't have any care in this world. Their love was so unusual that it stirred jealousy among some of the village women. In Mbala, men rarely displayed affection so openly, and the sight of Obika fetching water with Asama or carrying her basket of firewood set tongues wagging. Some whispered that Asama must have used juju to enchant her husband, but deep down, many of them simply envied the love and devotion Obika showed her. Not long after their marriage, Asama became pregnant. When she shared the news with Obika, his joy knew no bounds. He was going to be a father, a dream he had quietly nurtured for years. From that moment on, Obika treated Asama like a queen. He insisted on doing all the house chores himself, from cooking to fetching water, refusing to let her lift a finger. Even when Asama laughed and told him she was still strong. "I'm just pregnant and not sick." Obika would simply shake his head and say, "You are carrying my child and nothing is more important than your health." Achalugo watched her son with pride. "I raised you well," she would often say with a smile. Obika's devotion to his wife reminded her of her own late husband. It was this kind of love that had made her refuse to remarry after his death. No other man could fill the place of a husband who loved so deeply and treated her like a treasure. Then came the morning that changed everything. The cries of a newborn rang through Obika's compound, echoing like music in his ears. He leaped to his feet, laughing and shouting with joy. "It's a girl," the midwife announced, placing the beautiful baby in Asama's arms. Obika's heart swelled with pride and happiness as he looked at his daughter for the first time. Her skin was soft, her tiny fingers coiled around his, and her cry was strong and full of life. They named her Ola, which meant wealth, for she was the most precious treasure in their lives. Life became even more beautiful after Ola's birth. She grew into a bright and cheerful child, the apple of her father's eye. Obika adored his daughter and would do anything to make her happy. Whether it was weaving her little baskets for toys or carrying her on his shoulder as he walked to the farm, Ola brought immense joy to his life. Asama and Obika raised her with so much love that she lacked nothing. Though Asama was unable to conceive again after Ola, the couple remained content. Their little family was filled with laughter and love, and they shared a deep bond. Every evening, after the day's work was done, the three of them would sit outside under the stars. Obika would tell stories, and Ola, with her big curious eyes, would listen intently, while occasionally pointing out to a particularly bright star in the sky. Her love for stargazing became a family ritual, and her joy brought light to their lives. But life, unpredictable as it is, turned cruel. When Ola was 11 years old, tragedy struck. Asama had gone to the market one morning, just as she often did, but this time she never returned. On her way back home, she was involved in a terrible accident and died on the spot. The news hit Obika like a thunderbolt, shattering his world. The once lively compound was plunged into darkness, and sorrow hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Obika cried like a child, his pain raw and unbearable. He had not just lost his wife, he had lost the love of his life, the woman who had been his partner, his joy, and his everything. His mother, Achalugo, had just died not too long ago, and now was his wife. The villagers who gathered to console him did all they could, but Obika refused to be comforted. He wept openly, grieving for the moment they had shared and would never share again, the dreams they had for the future, and the bond they had built together. He had imagined growing old with Asama, sharing more evenings under the stars while watching Ola grow up together. Now, all those dreams were gone. As Obika looked at his daughter, her face streaked with tears, his heart broke even more. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as she cried. "Don't leave me too, Papa," Ola sobbed, her small arms clinging to him. Her words tore through him like a blade. "I will never leave you, my child," Obika whispered through his tears. He stroked her hair and cried with her, his grief spilling out for all to see. The villagers watched silently, feeling the depth of Obika's love for his wife and his overwhelming loss. From that day, Obika vowed to protect Ola with everything he had. Though his heart ached with the weight of his grief, he knew he had to be strong for his daughter, for the only family he had left, and for the love of the woman he would never forget. Ola was a solace to him as she grew into a beautiful and adorable young woman. She was a spitting image of her mother, gentle, kind, selfless. There was no way she could mend her father's broken heart. But Ola ensured she took care of him. They both shared a very strong bond. In return, Ola was the most precious treasure Obika had, and he loved her so much. Many years had passed, and Ola was now 15. The lively, carefree girl she had once been had matured into a thoughtful young woman. Ever since her mother's tragic death, Ola had watched her father Obika bury himself in his work. Day after day, he threw his energy into farming, often working long hours under the sun until he was utterly exhausted. But even as he worked, the sadness in his eyes never truly left. Ola could see it. He was still holding onto the memory of her mother Asama. The love they had shared was so deep that losing her had left a hole in his heart that nothing seemed to fill. Ola felt sorry for her father. She hated to see him so lonely, even if he rarely spoke about it. Over the years, she had tried to suggest that he take another wife. "Papa," she would say, "maybe if you married again, you wouldn't feel so lonely." But every time she brought it up, Obika would shake his head and refuse. "I am not ready, my daughter," he would say. "Your mother was everything, and I'm not ready to share my heart with anyone else." Though she understood his pain, Ola couldn't help but feel that getting married again might help her father heal. She thought a new wife could bring some warmth back into their home, and maybe even make him smile again. In fact, she had someone in mind, a woman she believed would be perfect for her father. Her name was Wando, a beautiful and kind-hearted woman who sold goods in the village market. Wando reminded Ola so much of her late mother. Her smile was warm and inviting, and she had a cheerful spirit that made people feel welcome around her. Ola admired the way Wando treated people with such genuine kindness, always taking time to greet those who passed by her store. Ola had known Wando for as long as she could remember. In fact, she and Wando's daughter, Nkoli, were very good friends. They had grown up together, playing, laughing, and even attending the same school. The two girls were inseparable. Whether they were fetching water from the stream, gathering firewood from the forest or walking through the village. They were always side by side, chatting and giggling like sisters. The villagers often commented on their bond, saying they looked more like siblings than friends. Nkoli's father had died not long after she was born, and Wando had never remarried. Despite being a single mother, she raised her children, Nkoli and her older brother Nansu, with so much love and care, and also worked hard to provide for her family. But she never let her struggles dampen her cheerful spirit. She treated everyone with kindness, especially Ola. After Achalugo's death, Wando had shown Ola even more love and care. Whenever Ola visited their home, Wando would welcome her with open arms, offering her food and checking in on her. "How are you, my dear?" she would ask, her voice full of concern. "Is everything okay at home? How is your father coping?" She always took the time to listen, often giving Ola advice that warmed her heart. "Take very good care of your father," she would say gently. "He loved your mother so much, and I know this has been hard for him. Be his strength." This small act of kindness made a deep impression on Ola. Wando's love wasn't just in her words, it was in her actions. Whatever she bought for Nkoli, she made sure to get the same for Ola, treating her like one of her own children. Over time, she won Ola's heart. Ola began to see Wando as more than just Nkoli's mother. She saw her as someone who could bring light and warmth back into her father's life. Ola felt strongly that Wando would make the perfect stepmother, but she didn't share her thoughts with Nkoli. She worried that her friend might not understand or might feel awkward about the idea. She also didn't want to look selfish, but she strongly hoped that this idea of hers would work. Wando radiated so much joy that she knew her father needed in his life. One evening, as the sun dipped low below the horizon, casting a warm glow over their home, Ola decided to prepare a special meal for her father. She knew how much he loved nsala soup, a local delicacy rich in flavors and memories. With care, she gathered the ingredients and set to work, her hands moving skillfully as she cooked. The aroma of the simmering soup filled the air, bringing a sense of comfort and nostalgia. When the meal was ready, Ola served her father, watching with a satisfied smile as he had his first taste of the meal. Obika's eyes lit up, and he savored each swallow, the familiar taste bringing back cherished memories. After finishing his meal, he leaned back, rubbing his stomach contentedly. "I have raised the best daughter," he declared with a grin. "I must collect a very fat bride price. Thank you, my Ola." Ola laughed softly as she cleared the plates, her heart warmed by her father's praise. After tidying up, she returned and sat beside him, her expression thoughtful. Obika noticed her demeanor and raised an eyebrow. "Looks like someone has something to tell her father," he said, still smiling. "Ask me what you want, my child, and count it as done." Taking a deep breath, Ola met her father's gaze. "Papa, the only thing I want is for you to be happy." Obika's smile faded slightly as he shook his head. "Mba, no, don't start, Ola. You know I won't listen to you." He already knew where this conversation was heading. They've had this episode every single time. Undeterred, Ola continued, her voice gentle but firm. "I'm not going to stress you, Papa. I've already found someone, and she's really a nice woman." Obika couldn't help but burst into laughter, Ola joining him. The idea of his daughter playing matchmaker was both amusing and endearing. "So, "Who is this wonderful woman that my daughter has chosen for me?" he asked, his tone light. Ola hesitated for a moment before speaking. "It's Wando." Obika's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Wando? Your friend's mother?" "Yes, Papa," Ola replied earnestly. "She's a good woman and she likes me a lot. She will make a good wife for you. You deserve to be happy, Papa, and I'm sure Mama wouldn't want you to be lonely." Obika was touched by his daughter's concern. He sighed, his heart heavy with memories of his late wife. "But I have you, Ola," he said softly, "and I'm not complaining." "I know, Papa," Ola said, reaching out to hold his hand. "But you need a wife, someone to share your life with. Please, just think about it." Obika looked into his daughter's eyes, seeing the sincerity and love there. After a moment, he nodded. "It's okay, my daughter. I know Wando is a good woman. She's been nothing but kind to you. I will think about it." For the first time since Asamma's passing, Obika allowed himself to consider the possibility of remarrying. The thought was both daunting and comforting. Ola's face lit up with joy, and she hugged her father tightly. "Thank you, Papa. Thank you so much." When Ola shared the news with Wando, the woman was both surprised and pleased. She had always admired Obika's strength and kindness, and the idea of joining their families brought her happiness. 2 months later, in a ceremony filled with love and hope, Obika and Wando were married. Their union, a source of joy for both families. Wando's children welcomed Obika with open arms, and together they formed a big, loving family. In the beginning, life in Obika's home was filled with joy. Marrying Wando brought warmth and laughter back into his life, and he welcomed Wando's children as his own children, ensuring everyone felt loved and happy. However, his daughter Ola always held a special place in his heart. Wando noticed how much Obika cherished Ola. He never got angry at her no matter what she did, and spent a lot of time talking and laughing with her every night. This made Wando feel left out and jealous. She wanted Obika to love her as much as he loved his first wife, Asamma, but she felt he was still distant. Even though he was kind to her, she wanted more affection and attention. Before they married, Wando had admired Obika from afar, often being extra nice to get his attention. When that didn't work, she decided to befriend Ola, hoping it would bring her closer to Obika. She was sweet and kind to Ola, and Ola, not knowing Wando's true feelings, loved her like a mother. But even after marrying Obika, Wando felt he cared more for his daughter than for her. As time passed, Wando's jealousy towards Ola grew stronger, eating away at her like a slow-burning fire. To her, Ola was a stumbling block, someone standing in the way of her own happiness. Each time she saw the bond Ola shared with Obika, she felt overshadowed and insignificant. However, despite her growing resentment, Wando dared not harm Ola while Obika was alive. She knew that if anything happened to his beloved daughter, Obika would unleash his wrath without hesitation. Ola, completely unaware of the storm brewing in Wando's heart, continued to love her stepmother dearly. She trusted her, treated her with respect, and even sought her approval. In her innocence, Ola believed that Wando's kindness towards her was genuine, not realizing that it had been a mask hiding envy and bitterness. Just when life seemed to settle into a peaceful rhythm for Ola and her father, tragedy struck once again, shattering their fragile happiness. One fateful afternoon, while Obika was working in the fields, a poisonous snake bit him. The villagers rushed him back home and the native doctor was summoned immediately. Despite all efforts to save him, the venom spread quickly, overpowering even the doctor's best remedies. A few days later, Obika succumbed to the poison, leaving his daughter and the entire village in deep sorrow. The news of Obika's death spread rapidly, and soon loud wails erupted from his compound. The villagers gathered to mourn, their faces etched with sadness. Ola was inconsolable. She fell to the ground, rolling and crying out in anguish. Papa oh, she wailed, her voice raw with pain. I am now alone. Who will sing for me? You said you would never leave me. Who will praise my cooking? Who will call me my Ola? Her heart-wrenching cries pierced the air, and the villagers could only shake their heads, unable to comfort her. Obika had been her rock, her world, and now he was gone. After Obika's burial, life took a harsh and cruel turn for Ola. With her father no longer there to protect her, Wando's true nature was revealed. The once kind stepmother now became a source of torment. She forbade her daughter Nkoli from even speaking to Ola, calling her an evil child who had caused her parents' deaths. Any day I see you with that witch, I will make sure I end your life, she warned Nkoli, with a tone so fierce that the girl dared not disobey. Ola, now isolated in her grief, was left to face her pain alone. Wando and her children wasted no time in taking over everything Obika had left behind. They lived comfortably, enjoying the fruits of his labor, while Ola became nothing more than a shadow in her own home. She was reduced to a servant, responsible for every chore imaginable: fetching water, gathering firewood, cooking, washing and sweeping. Nkoli and Nonto would sit back, enjoying the luxuries their mother had taken, while Ola toiled from dawn to dusk. At the slightest provocation, Wando would lash out at Ola with venomous words. You witch! You think you can kill me and my children, just like you killed your parents? Ah, never. We will rather suck your blood, she would scream, her voice filled with spite. You are a child of bad luck, misfortune, Tofiakwa. Each insult cut Ola deeply, leaving scars far worse than any physical wound. Ola's once bright spirit dimmed under the weight of her suffering. The pain of losing both her parents was already unbearable, but the cruelty of someone who had once shown her kindness, someone she had even considered as mother, made it even harder to bear. She couldn't understand how Wando had transformed so completely, from a caring figure into someone so full of hatred. One fateful day, after enduring so much pain and silence, Ola decided she needed answers. She could no longer ignore the harsh treatment from Wando, her stepmother, or the cold hatred that seemed to radiate from her childhood. Summoning all the courage she could muster, she approached Wando cautiously. Her voice was soft, almost trembling, as she asked, Mama, what have I done wrong to you? For a brief moment, there was silence. Then, Wando's eyes lit up with fury, blazing like fire. Her voice rose, sharp and cutting, as she spat her response. Do you want to know what you did? She said. Do you really want to know? You killed my husband. I never enjoyed my marriage because of you. You witch. You had him all to yourself every day. And now, you've made me a widow again. I will never forgive you. You child of misfortune. I will make sure you pay for it. Ola's heart sank. Her mouth fell open in shock as she took a step back. To Mama, I didn't kill my father, she said, her voice breaking as tears filled her eyes. I would never harm my father, and I won't harm anyone. Don't you dare call me Mama again, Wando snapped. Her words were cold as ice. I can't be a mother of a killer like you. I am your madam henceforth, and you will address me as such. I did not kill him, Ola cried out. I didn't kill him, she said, tears streaming down her face as she struggled to defend herself. But her words seemed to fall on deaf ears. The commotion attracted Nonto, Wando's son, who stormed out of the hut with his fists clenched, his face twisted with anger. Are you shouting at my mother? He bellowed. How dare you? Are you crazy? Before Ola could explain herself, Nonso shoved her to the ground. She gasped as the air was knocked out of her lungs. He began punching her stomach mercilessly, his blows landing one after the other. Don't you ever talk back to my mother again. Ever, he roared. His kicks followed, bruising her legs and ribs as Ola screamed out in pain. That night, Ola limped out of the house and made her way to her father's grave. Her body ached with every step, but the pain in her heart was even greater. She knelt by the mound of earth that now held the man who had been her entire world. Wrapping her arms around herself, she cried bitterly, her tears soaking the ground. Papa, she whispered, her voice trembling. You said you would never leave me, but you left me. I wish I could join you and Mama. I can't do this anymore. I can't bear this life anymore. She longed for the peace that death might bring, but it refused to come. The days that followed were no better. Ola's life became a cycle of endless chores and harsh words. Wando ensured that every moment of her life was filled with suffering and misery. She made it clear that Ola's existence on earth was a mistake. The once beautiful, happy girl was now almost unrecognizable. Her clothes were ragged, her hair unkempt, and her eyes, once full of life, were now dull and sad. Meanwhile, Nkoli, Wando's daughter, strutted around the village in beautiful dresses, her head held high as if she owned the streets. All the lovely things Ola's father had gifted Ola, her dresses, her jewelry, even her little treasures, were taken away and given to Nkoli. You are now a maid, Wando told Ola with a sneer. You don't need any of these luxuries. Tears rolled down Ola's cheeks as she watched everything her father had worked for being stripped away from her. In the house she had once called home, she was now a stranger, but she didn't dare speak up. Nonso was always watching, his eyes sharp and following her like a hawk, ready to pounce at the slightest sign of disobedience. The once happy girl, who danced and laughed with her father, was now withering away like a dying flame. The only spark of hope that remained in her was the thought that in 2 years she would be old enough to marry. She dreamed of escaping this nightmare and finding a man who would love her as her father had loved her mother. As she cooked in the kitchen, her mind would drift into a world of fantasies. she imagined a handsome, wealthy man who would appear like a hero, wiping away her tears, marrying and treating her like the queen she longed to be. In her dreams, he would speak to her with a deep, kind voice and smile at her with warmth that melted her pain. In these moments, she could almost taste happiness again. But when the dream faded and reality returned, her heart broke into 1,000 pieces. She was still in the kitchen, surrounded by smoke and pots, with nothing but despair to greet her. Meanwhile, in the vast and mighty kingdom of Mbala, there reigned a king whose name struck fear and respect across all the neighboring lands. His name was Eze-Kalisia, a man who embodied strength, power, and absolute authority. To speak his name was to summon images of unyielding might, for no kingdom dared challenge Mbala during his reign. King Eze-Kalisia was known as a warrior king, a man of valor who had commanded great victories on the battlefield. Under his rule, Mbala flourished in peace, its people protected by a formidable army of strong and fearless warriors. These soldiers, loyal to the king, ensured the kingdom's safety, allowing its citizens to live without fear as they went about their daily lives. Eze-Kalisia was a king like no other, a symbol of greatness that no one could ignore. King Eze-Kalisia was blessed with one child, a son named Prince Obidi, who was his pride and the heir apparent to the throne. But Eze-Kalisia's joy as a father was shadowed by a deep resentment for his own father, King Owa. In Eze-Kalisia's eyes, Owa had been a weak king, a man too soft-hearted to lead a powerful kingdom like Mbala. During Owa's reign, the kingdom suffered betrayal and invasion. Treasures were stolen, and enemies encroached on the land. The most shameful part was that Owa was betrayed by his own people. Trusted men who served him but turned against him because of his kindness. Owa's unwillingness to act with a firm hand nearly cost him his throne. Eze-Kalisia had fought like a wild lion to reclaim his father's throne, shedding sweat and blood to restore Mbala's honor. He swore that his son Obidi would never inherit the weakness he despised in his father. "I will not raise a woman in the name of a man," Eze-Kalisia often said. For him, strength, fearlessness, and the ability to command respect were the marks of true royalty. From a young age, Prince Obidi was molded into a man of power and authority. He was strikingly handsome, with a commanding presence that left anyone who saw him in awe. But Obidi's childhood was far from easy. His mother, the queen, died when he was just 8 years old, leaving him without the warmth and care of a mother's love. The loss deeply affected him, but there was no time for grief. Eze-Kalisia never remarried, though he had many concubines who warmed his bed. None of them played the role of a mother to Obidi. Instead, the prince was raised under the strict, unyielding hand of his father. Eze-Kalisia drilled into his son that weakness had no place in royalty. "You cannot show weakness as a royalty," he would back. "You must be feared to command respect. If I ever see my father's softness in you, I will kill you myself. I fought with my blood to secure this throne. You must be tough. Obidi, you must be tough." These words were more than threats. They were the principles by which Obidi lived. Under his father's watchful eye, Prince Obidi grew into a man tougher and more formidable than Eze-Kalisia himself. He was not only hardworking, but also wealthy beyond measure. With vast lands, abundant crops, herds of livestock, and untold riches of silver and gold. His wealth was legendary, but his strength and power were what truly defined him. Trained from childhood to fight the toughest battles, Obidi became a warrior unmatched in skill. Even the 10 most powerful soldiers in Mbala's army could not defeat him. His reputation as a fierce and unyielding leader spread wide and far. Like his father, Obidi was unforgiving. Traitors and betrayals had no place in his kingdom, and he did not hesitate to deliver justice swiftly and mercilessly. He was very quick to kill. His stern demeanor left no room for light-heartedness or laughter. No one in the kingdom had ever seen him smile. Obidi had grown up with no time for jokes or play, and his face was always serious, reflecting the discipline and focus that had been instilled in him. Despite his intimidating nature, those who had the rare privilege to meet Prince Obidi in person could not stop speaking of his remarkable looks. His handsomeness was something to be discussed another day, and even though the people feared him greatly, his looks was a constant topic of admiration and mystery among the people of Mbala. Obidi was a prince like no other, a man destined to carry the legacy of his father while forging a path of strength and unshakable power. Ever since Obika's death, Nonso, Ola's stepbrother, transformed into someone unrecognizable. He had always had it in him, and the moment he took control of Obika's wealth, he became reckless and wayward, abandoning all sense of responsibility. Instead of taking care of his late stepfather's wealth or helping on the farm, Nonso spent his days at the elite bar owned by the infamous Prince Obidi. There, he drank himself to stupor and lavished Obika's hard-earned money on prostitutes. Nonso never set foot on the farm or managed the properties his stepfather had left behind. His only talent seemed to be spending money. It wasn't long before he began selling Obika's properties one by one to fund his extravagant lifestyle. And within 2 years, everything Obika had worked so hard to build was gone, except for a few farmlands that couldn't be sold, and Ola tended to them tirelessly. She worked herself to the bone to provide food for the family, while Nkoli refused to help, claiming it wasn't her responsibility. Lazy and self-absorbed Nkoli wouldn't even lift a finger, and Nonso refused to change his ways. As Nonso's pockets grew emptier, his desperation grew. He turned to gambling, hoping to double what money he had left. But instead, he accumulated massive debts at the bar. Nonso knew better than to cross Prince Obidi, the owner of the bar, and he scrambled to pay back his debts. In his desperation, Nonso became a thief. Night after night, while the villagers of Mbala slept, Nonso would sneak around stealing goats, chickens, yams, and everything else he could find. He was surprisingly good at it. The villagers would wake up to find their belongings missing, sometimes crying at the top of their voice as they wondered who could have committed such acts. Mbala had always been peaceful, not known for thefts, and the community was shaken by these sudden crimes. Nonso would travel to faraway villages to sell the stolen goods, using the money to pay parts of his loans, but it was never enough. His gambling continued, as did his habit of spending money on prostitutes, and the debts piled higher each day. When there was nothing left to steal from the villagers, Nonso turned his attention to his own family. He began stealing Wando's expensive clothes and jewelry, selling them off to make quick money. But Nonso was clever. He always made sure that Ola took the blame. Anytime something went missing, he was the first to point fingers. "I saw her stealing it," he would lie. And because the family already hated Ola, they believed him without question. This only worsened Ola's suffering. Nonso would beat her mercilessly, kicking and punching her as he shouted, "Thief! How dare you steal from us? Where is the money?" Ola's cries for help were ignored. Wando would lash out with harsh words and curses, calling her a worthless child and accusing her of being a thief. Deep down, Wando knew that Ola was innocent, but watching Ola suffer brought her twisted joy, and she made no effort to stop Nonso's cruelty. Nkoli, meanwhile, would sit in a corner of the hut, painting her nails as if nothing was happening. She didn't care about the chaos around her. Nkoli had resorted to sleeping with different men for money to maintain her lavish lifestyle. But her disdain for Ola ran deep. Ola was everything Nkoli was not. Beautiful, hardworking, decent, and kind. It wouldn't be a mistake if one said Ola was perfect. Even though Nkoli knew Ola would never steal, she never came to her defense. She too took pleasure in watching Ola suffer. Ola's days were filled with pain and humiliation. She felt trapped in a life where no one cared for her, where every effort she made was met with hatred and blame. Now 18 years old, Ola longed for freedom. She couldn't wait to marry and live the nightmare she called home. Every night, she would sit outside under the stars, her heart heavy with sorrow. She prayed to the gods to send her a Prince Charming, a kind, handsome man who would rescue her from her suffering and love her just like her father had loved her mother. She would imagine him holding her hand, speaking to her in a soft, comforting voice, and promising her a better life. But as each morning came, her dreams remained unfulfilled, and her heart broke a little more. She was still trapped, waiting for a savior who might never come. One early morning, the peaceful silence in Obika's compound was shattered by the arrival of the royal guards. Their faces were hard, their eyes blazing with anger, and their swords gleamed meaningfully in the sunlight. They looked ready for battle, and their presence sent waves of fear through the air. Ola was outside sweeping the compound when she noticed them. Her heart skipped a beat, and without thinking, she dropped her broom and hurried into hiding. Peeking from behind a hut, she watched as the guards stormed in, shouting Nonso's name. Her chest tightened with fear. What has Nonso done this time, she wondered. It couldn't be anything good. These men didn't look like they were here for a casual visit. Moments later, Wando burst out of the hut, her face pale with panic. "Please, my son is not at home. What has he done?" she asked, her voice trembling. "The prince wants him," one of the guards barked. Wando staggered back silently, her hands clutching her chest. Her worst fears were coming true. Shaking her head in despair, she wailed, "This isn't good at all. Nonso wants to kill me." As if summoned by their voices, Nonso appeared from the bush nearby, looking disheveled and guilty. The moment his eyes landed on the royal guards, his expression shifted to one of sheer terror. He turned on his heels, attempting to flee, but the guards were quicker. They caught him within seconds, their strong arms yanking him back. Nonso struggled and shouted, but it was no use. The guards weren't here for games. They beat him mercilessly for trying to run, their fists and kicks landing heavily on his body. Then, without a word, they dragged him towards the palace, their grip unrelenting. Wanda ran after them, her cries echoing through the compound. "Please, don't kill my son," she pleaded desperately, tears streaming down her face as she tried to keep up with their hurried pace. Her frantic shouts drew the attention of the villagers, who began to gather around, curious about the commotion. "What's happening?" someone whispered. "Why are the royal guards here?" another asked. The villagers exchanged worried glances, but no one dared intervene. But Wanda didn't care about the stares or the whispers. Her mind was focused on her son and what the prince might do to him. She knew the prince wasn't someone to be cursed. What could Nonso have done to draw the wrath of Prince Obidi? She wondered, her heart pounding with fear. All she could do now was follow, pleading for mercy, hoping against hope that her son's life would be spared. Prince Obidi sat in the serene palace garden when the guards dragged Nonso in. The garden's beauty, with its neatly trimmed hedges and blooming flowers, sharply contrasted the stormy mood in the air. Prince Obidi's face was a mask of stern indifference, his cold eyes locking onto Nonso like a predator sizing up its prey. The aura he carried was terrifying, a heavy weight that made Nonso feel as though the ground beneath him might open and swallow him whole. For a long moment, the prince said nothing, his pierced gaze scanning Nonso from head to toe. Nonso's knees felt weak, and sweat beaded on his forehead. Then finally, Prince Obidi spoke, his voice low but firm, cutting through the air like a blade. "How much do you owe me?" he asked, his tone calm yet commanding. Nonso's lips trembled as he stammered his reply. 500,000 naira, sir." The prince's gaze didn't waver, and the silence that followed was suffocating. Then, the next question hit Nonso like a thunderbolt. "And how much did you make from selling the things you stole from the villagers?" Nonso's head snapped up, his face a mask of shock and confusion. His heart raced as he struggled to comprehend the prince's words. How did he know? Nonso had been certain no one had seen him during his nightly deaths. He had been so careful, or so he thought. Now, the secret he had buried so deeply was exposed. "I don't repeat myself," Prince Obidi warned, his voice sharper now as his eyes narrowed. Nonso's mouth opened, but no words came out. He stuttered, his voice barely audible. I can't remember the exact figure," he managed to say, his hands shaking. The prince's expression hardened, and his voice rose with anger. "You dare to steal from the villagers of this kingdom? You!" His voice was like thunder, vibrating through the garden. "I can hear your mother crying at the gates, and I will spare you because of her. But mark my words, you have 7 days. 7 days to bring me 2 million naira. Nonso's breath caught in his throat. 2 million. He hadn't even managed to pay the prince the 500,000 he owed. Now this? Prince Obidi continued, his tone like iron. "I will take my money, and with the rest, you will buy back everything you've stolen and return them to the owners. You have just 7 days." His voice rose with finality, and his piercing glare made Nonso feel as though he might crumble on the spot. "Take him away," he commanded in a low tone. The guards grabbed Nonso roughly and tossed him out of the palace gates like a piece of discarded trash. He landed on the ground, trembling like a dry leaf in the wind. As he staggered to his feet, panic consumed him. What am I going to do? He thought, his mind racing. There was no way he could come up with 2 million naira in 7 days. He had squandered everything his stepfather Obika had left behind. As Nonso stumbled away, Wando rushed to him, tears streaming down her face. She had been relieved to see her son alive, but her relief quickly turned to despair. Nonso, she cried, shaking her head. What have you done? Why does the prince want you? Nonso said nothing. His mind was too clouded with fear and regret. He knew one thing for certain. If he couldn't find the money in time, Prince Obidike's mercy would run out, and his punishment would be swift and brutal. He was in a mess deeper than he had ever imagined, and there seemed to be no way out. For days, Obika's compound was unusually quiet. Ola noticed the change immediately. The constant noise, arguments, and chaos that usually filled the house had vanished, replaced by an eerie silence. It was so still that Ola could finally breathe a little easier. She didn't know why the house had gone quiet, but she wasn't bothered. If anything, she had peace, even if it was just temporal. Everyone seemed to be murmuring amongst themselves, avoiding her altogether. No one said a word to her, which was strange. Inside the hut, Wando sat on the floor wailing uncontrollably. Nonso, you have killed me. Chimo, what do we do now? Where do we begin? She cried, her hands gripping her head in despair. Nonso sat outside, his face buried in his hands. He felt the weight of his mistakes crushing on him. He had thought about running away, but that would only make things worse. He knew Prince Obidike wouldn't hesitate to have him hunted down and killed. 4 days had already passed and the deadline was closing in. The little money they had managed to gather was nowhere near enough. Wando had scrapped together all the savings they had from the farm proceeds Ola had sold, and Nkoli had grudgingly contributed the small amount she had left, but it wasn't even enough to pay the 500,000 Nonso owed, let alone the 2 million the prince demanded. Tears ran down Nonso's face as he sat there feeling hopeless. He didn't want to die, but there was no way out. Just then, Ola approached the hut with a bowl of rice. Madam, I brought you lunch, she said softly, placing the food in front of Wando before quietly leaving. Nonso's eyes followed her as she walked away. He hadn't really paid attention to Ola before, but now he did. She was undeniably beautiful. Her features were delicate, her skin glowed despite her suffering, and from what Nonso knew, she was still a virgin, untouched by any man. A desperate idea formed in Nonso's mind. The prince has mistresses, lots of them. What would he think of Ola? Nonso thought. If he couldn't pay the money, maybe he could offer the prince something else. Ola's virginity. She could satisfy the prince however he wanted. And when he gets tired of her, he could return her. It was a risky plan, but Nonso was willing to try anything to save himself. Nonso shared this idea with his mother. At first, Wando was silent, but then she nodded. She's good for nothing anyway, she said coldly. At least, she can be useful for once. I just don't want to lose you. Without wasting time, they set their plan into motion. Ola was summoned to the hut, and when she entered, she was surprised to find Wando smiling at her. Since her father's death, Wando had been nothing but cruel, so this sudden kindness was unnerving. Ola stood frozen, unsure of what to expect. "Sit here, my daughter," Wando said, patting the stool beside her. Ola hesitated, but eventually sat down. Her eyes darted nervously as Wando began speaking. "For the next 2 days, you won't be going to the farm," she said, handing Ola some ointments and soap. "You will stay home and take care of yourself. Use this to bath. Ugoli, the village hairbraider, will come tomorrow to braid your hair. Please, do everything I say. You need to look your best." Ola nodded slowly, her confusion growing. She dared not ask questions, but she knew something was off. Why this sudden change? Why was Wando being kind? And why was the house so quiet? Wando was up to something, and Ola's instincts told her it wasn't good. 2 days later, the plan unfolded. On the appointed day, Ola was adorned in a stunning dress, her hair beautifully braided, and her neck adorned with matching jewelry. When she looked at her reflection, she could barely recognize herself. She looked breathtaking, an epitome of beauty. Even Nonto and Wando couldn't help but smile. To them, there was no way the prince could say no to someone so beautiful. As the sun rose higher in the sky, they set out for the palace. Ola walked beside him, oblivious to what awaited her. Nonto's heart pounded in his chest with every step. For him, it was a do-or-die situation. Either the prince accepted their offer and he lived, or he rejected it and Nonto's life would end. The weight of the gamble pressed heavily on him as they drew closer to the palace gates. As they approached the palace gates, Ola could feel the tension radiating from Nonto. He turned to her, his voice shaky, despite the commanding tone he tried to use. "As soon as you see him approaching, you must smile," he instructed, his eyes darting nervously. His fear was evident, but Ola still didn't understand why they were at the palace. The royal guard stopped them at the gate. "Wait at the garden," he said curtly. "He is in a council meeting with kings and princes from various kingdoms." Nonto nodded quickly, his legs trembling slightly, while Ola stood quietly by his side. As they waited in the palace garden, Ola's eyes began to wander. She had never been inside the palace before, and the sight before her took her breath away. The grandeur of the palace left her awestruck. Everything was pristine and dazzling, from the opulent mansion to the well-cut flowers in full bloom. And then, the perfectly manicured lawns. The palace seemed like a slice of paradise, unlike anything she had ever seen. As her gaze swept across the vibrant garden, a smile spread across her face. For a moment, she allowed herself to dream again. She imagined herself living here with her Prince Charming, running hand in hand with him through the garden, laughing under the rain. The thought warmed her heart, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of happiness. She was completely lost in her fantasy when a deep, soft voice pulled her back to reality. "You like what you see?" the voice asked gently. Startled, Ola turned around quickly. Her eyes widened in shock as they met the gaze of a tall, muscular and strikingly handsome man standing behind her. She gasped softly, almost choking on her breath. For a moment, she was frozen, unable to speak. Finally, she remembered what Nonto had told her. Summoning her courage, she flashed a nervous smile and bowed slightly. Obidike's lips curled into a grin. He had never witnessed anything so amusing. Her wide-eyed stare and clumsy bow made him chuckle inwardly. But what truly caught his attention was her beauty. He had seen many beautiful women, but there was something about her, a purity and innocence that set her apart. For a moment, he couldn't take his eyes off her. He didn't know who she was or why she was there with this idiot, but he was going to find out. His expression hardened as he turned his attention to Nantu. The grin faded, replaced by a stern look as he sat down. "I believe the money is complete by now," he said, his voice firm and commanding. Nantu began to stammer, his hands shaking as he pointed to Ola. She. "Will you speak?" Obidike thundered, his fierce tone making Nantu flinch. Ola watched in disbelief. The same man who had been so cruel and domineering toward her was now trembling before someone else. She stood there, also confused, trying to make sense of what was happening. Then, Nonso finally blurted out the words that sent a chill down her spine. "She's a virgin," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You can take her as your mistress, my prince. When you are tired of her, you can return her to me, so I can marry her off." I couldn't get the money." "Prince? That was the prince?" Ola's world seemed to shatter. Her heart raced as the weight of his words sank in. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. The very person who was supposed to protect her had offered her up like a piece of property. Her smile disappeared, replaced by fear and sadness. Obidike's gaze shifted back to Ola. She stood there, her shoulders slumped, her eyes filled with pain. For the first time in his life, he felt something he couldn't explain. Pity. He had never pitied anyone before, but something about her struck a chord deep within him. She looked like someone who needed protection, and for reasons he didn't fully understand, he felt compelled to give it to her. After a brief silence, Obidike spoke again. "Who is she to you?" Nanto hesitated before replying, "My sister." Obidike's expression didn't change, but inside, he was surprised. He had grown up watching his father treat his mother cruelly, and he had believed his father was the worst man alive. But this man before him, Nanto, was even worse. To offer his own sister's virginity in exchange for his debt. This was despicable. Obidike's eyes narrowed slightly as he studied Ola again. Something about Nonso's claim didn't sit right with him. Finally, he stood and said in an emotionless tone, "You will be locked up in the palace prison while I decide what to do with her." He called for the guards, who quickly seized Nonso and dragged him away. Wando's wails could be heard faintly in the distance as she watched her son being taken. Meanwhile, a group of palace maidens escorted Ola to the prince's quarters. Her heart pounded as she followed them, unsure of what lay ahead. She didn't just understand what the prince planned to do with her. But one thing was certain: her life had taken just an unexpected turn. Ola had heard countless stories about Prince Obidike. The villager spoke of his unmatched strength, his unyielding toughness, and his commanding presence. He was a man, both feared and deeply respected, a figure of awe and power. But hearing about him and seeing him up close were two very different things. As she sat in his chamber, realizing who he was, her heart pounded so hard that she thought it might leap out of her chest. This was the man who showed no mercy, the man her step-brother Nanso had foolishly crossed. What would he do to her now? The thought of Nanso's actions filled her with pain. Nanso owed the prince money, yet, instead of finding a way to pay it back, he had decided to trade her virginity as payment. What hurt even more was that her stepmother Wando had supported such a cruel and ridiculous idea. How could they stoop so low? How much more evil could they possibly be? The palace around her was breathtakingly beautiful. The walls sparkled, the floors gleamed, and the air was fragrant with flowers from the garden. But Ola could not appreciate any of it. She was too consumed by her misery to notice the grandeur. Tears streamed down her face as she sat there sobbing quietly. She thought about the tiny dream she had held onto for so long. The dream of finding her Prince Charming, a man who would cherish and love her. That dream, like so many other beautiful things in her life, was now slipping away. Her entire existence seemed destined for heartbreak, and she cried bitterly. She didn't hear him enter. Prince Obidi walked into the room silently, his eyes immediately drawn to the young maiden sitting on the couch and crying softly. Her sobs filled the room, and for a moment he froze. The sound stirred something deep within him, something he hadn't felt in years. It brought back memories he had tried to bury. Memories of his mother crying in the dark after his father had beaten her. But he wasn't like his father. He had spent his whole life making sure of that. Obidi couldn't stand it any longer. The sight of her trembling shoulders and the sound of her tears broke through his cold exterior. He walked towards her, gently, careful not to startle her. And then, without thinking, he reached out and held her in his arms. "You don't have to be scared of me," he said softly, his voice unusually gentle. "I won't harm you." But Ola couldn't stop crying. It was as though a dam inside her had burst open, and all the pain, fear, and sadness she had bottled up for so long came rushing out like a mighty flood. She clung to Obidi tightly, her sobs shaking her small frame. Obidi didn't know what to do. He wasn't used to this. He had never comforted anyone before, but he couldn't push her away. He simply stood there, letting her cry, offering his arms as her refuge. It dawned on him that she didn't even know the full extent of what had been planned for her, that her own stepbrother had tried to trade her innocence for his debt. The thoughts made his jaw tighten in anger. He wasn't his father. He had promised himself that long ago. The funny thing was that growing up, he had worked hard to win his father's approval, only to grow into a man who despised everything his father stood for. He would not hurt her no matter what. When Ola's sobs finally subsided, Obidi called for one of the palace maidens to bring her some food. He sat quietly, watching, as she nibbled at the meal. She barely ate, but he didn't rush her. Instead, he found himself studying her face. She was too beautiful, a beauty so pure that it stirred feelings in him he didn't recognize. As he sat there, Obidi thought about everything he had learned about her. She was an orphan, left in the care of a cruel stepmother and a selfish stepbrother who were not even related to her by blood. She had endured unimaginable pain, and now she was here in his palace, looking as though she had never been loved in her entire life. Obidi made a silent vow. He would protect her. He didn't know why, but something about her made him feel protective, and he wasn't going to let anyone hurt her again. When she finished eating, he stood and gestured for her to follow him. "You need rest," he said gently. He led her upstairs to a room prepared for her. Opening the door, he stepped aside and let her enter. The room was warm and inviting, with a soft bed covered in clean sheets. "This is where you will sleep," he said. "I will see you tomorrow." Ola stood in the doorway staring at him in disbelief. Was this really the mighty Prince Obidi, the man everyone feared? He had been nothing but kind to her, even though she had expected the worst. She had been terrified that he would harm her or force himself on her, taking away her virginity, but he had done none of those things. As she lay on the bed that night staring at the ceiling, she couldn't stop wondering why he had been so kind. Tomorrow was another day, and she didn't know what it held for her. But one thing was certain: whatever came next, it couldn't possibly be worse than what she had already endured. Ola didn't wake up until the sun poured through the window, its golden rays warming her face. She stared, blinking at the unfamiliar room around her. She had never slept so long, and certainly not in a bed so soft. Sitting up, she realized where she was, and the events of the previous day came flooding back. She felt a mixture of fear and uncertainty. This house was so large, and the vastness of it frightened her. She stood up and managed to find her way to the steps, her feet hesitating with each move. Downstairs, Prince Obidi was sitting at a large table having his breakfast. His private quarters in the palace were spacious and luxurious, with enough room for him to live in comfort without the constant interruptions of the palace other occupants. As Ola descended, her presence caught his attention. She was still dressed in the simple gown she had worn the day before, but to him, she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. Her innocence and grace captivated him, and he found it difficult to look away. She approached him timidly, bowing slightly as she greeted politely. "Good morning, my prince," she said softly. He acknowledged her greeting with a nod and motioned for her to sit down. Just then, a maid entered carrying several large bags. The prince turned to Ola and said, "Go with her. She has brought you some clothes. Freshen up and I'll be waiting for you." Ola nodded and followed the maid out of the room. Obidi's eyes lingered on her until she disappeared from sight. Once she was gone, he sighed deeply. He hadn't slept at all through the night. His thoughts had been consumed by her. Her innocence, her beauty, and the way she had clung to him when she cried. He couldn't fight it any longer. He was falling in love with her. He had promised Nonso he would think of what to do with her, and now he had decided He wasn't going to let Nonso's vile plan succeed. He wouldn't take her virginity and discard her like some object. No, he was going to make her his wife. The idea of marriage hadn't crossed his mind before yesterday, but now it was all he could think about. Ola deserved better, and he would make sure she got it. When Ola returned dressed in a beautiful new gown that fits her perfectly, Obidike's breath caught in his chest. She looked stunning, and without realizing it, he found himself smiling at her. She sat down across from him, and the palace maid served her breakfast. As she ate, Obika used this opportunity to ask her about her life. Her story filled him with both sorrow and rage. As she spoke of how Nonso and his family had turned her from an heir into a slave, stealing everything her father had, Obidike's fists clenched under the table. How could anyone be so heartless? And now, they had tried to sell her virginity to pay off Nonso's debt. It was despicable. He vowed that Nonso and his family would pay for their crimes. Every single thing they had stolen from Ola would be returned. He wouldn't let them get away with this. His anger softened as he looked at Ola. Her beauty wasn't just in appearance. It was in her quiet strength, her grace, and the way she smiled shyly at him now. Somehow, this maiden had managed to draw out a part of him he hadn't known existed. A softer, gentler side. "Tell me," he said suddenly, his voice calm but curious. "What are your dreams? What have you ever desired?" For the first time since she arrived at the palace, a beautiful warm smile spread across Ola's face. It was hesitant at first, but it reached her eyes, lighting up her entire expression. Obidike found himself smiling back, captivated by her. "This is my secret," she said quietly, glancing down at her hands. Obidike chuckled softly, leaning back in his chair. "My ears will keep your secret. Trust me," he said in a low, playful tone. Ola blushed, her cheeks turning a soft pink. She couldn't believe this was the same prince everyone feared. They said he was cold, emotionless, and had never laughed or smiled. Yet, here he was, laughing and smiling at her. His warmth and kindness were disarming, and she felt herself relaxing in his presence. "Well," she began, her voice soft but steady, "I have always wanted to marry a man who would love me like my father loved my mother, and treat me like a queen. A man who would wipe my tears and make me smile every day. That is my only little dream." Obidike looked into her eyes, his heart tightening at her words. She deserved that and so much more. He had already made up his mind, but hearing her speak so honestly made him even more certain. "Marry me then," he said suddenly, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Ola felt her breath seize. Her heart pounded wildly, and for a moment, she thought she might stop breathing altogether. "What?" she managed to say, her voice shaky and barely audible. Her wide eyes stared at Obidike in disbelief, her entire body frozen in shock. Obidike took a deep breath, his gaze never leaving hers. His voice was soft yet steady, filled with a sincerity that reached deep into her heart. "I've never felt this way before. Not for anyone," he began. "From the moment I laid my eyes on you, I knew I couldn't let you go. I won't take your virginity in exchange for a pitiful 2 million naira. You are worth far more than that, Ola. It tears me apart to think anyone could put a price on you, as if you are something to be sold. You are not. You are a treasure. My treasure. Ola's lip parted, but no words came out. Tears welled up in her eyes as he continued. I don't need many years to know you. I want to be devoted to you, not just today, not just for a moment, but forever. I want to make your little dreams come true, to love you the way you deserve and give you the life you've always longed for. Will you let me do that? Will you let me be the man who stands by your side? His voice was filled with emotion, each word spoken with a tenderness she had never experienced before. A single tear rolled down Ola's cheek, followed by another and then another. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Never in her wildest dreams had she imagined this moment. She had spent years feeling unloved, unwanted, and discarded, just like her stepmother Nono had made her believe. Yet, here was this powerful man, one of the most feared figures in the kingdom, speaking to her with such kindness and respect. For the first time in her life, she felt safe, truly safe and cherished. Yes, she whispered, her voice trembling with joy. I want to do life with you. I want that more than anything. Obidi's face lit up with a smile so genuine that it melted her heart. Without hesitation, he stepped closer and gently lifted her from her seat. He wrapped his strong arms around her, pulling her into a tight embrace. Ola's head rested against his chest, and she could hear the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, grounding her in this moment of pure bliss. I like what you do to me, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. You bring out a side of me no one has ever seen before. You make me the man I've always wanted to be. I will love you and protect you with my life, Ola. I swear it. The weight of his words broke the dam of emotions Ola had been holding back. She clung to him, tears streaming down her face as her heart overflowed with gratitude and happiness. In Obidi's arms, she felt a warmth she had never known. It was as if every piece of her broken heart was being mended slowly. Thank you, she whispered against his chest. A few days after declaring his intention, Prince Obidi approached his father, King Eze Kalisia, to formally inform him of his decision to marry Ola. Their bond had deepened over the days, and the prince could hardly wait to make her his wife. When he spoke of his intentions, the king's face remained cold and unreadable. Finally, Eze Kalisia broke the silence with a single question. Why that ordinary maiden and not Princess EJ? The prince's answer was simple. I love her, he said, his voice steady and firm. The king's reaction was immediate and furious. What nonsense is that? Eze Kalisia barked, his voice echoing through the hall. That word does not exist. Love? Marriage is a duty you perform for continuity, for the survival of the throne. You can't just marry any silly little girl to birth your heirs. Princess EJ is a royal blood, trained for the throne. She is strong, ambitious, and exactly the kind of woman I approve of. Together, you two would form a powerful alliance and make Mbala even stronger. Do not disappoint me. I didn't raise you to be a weakling. Only weak men fall in love. Prince Obidi clenched his fist. His body tense as he fought to keep his anger in check. But this was too much. His father's words had crossed the line. Slowly he rose from his seat, his eyes blazing with determination. All my life, he began, his voice calm, but seething with suppressed fury. I have done everything you asked of me. I have lived by your rules, fought your battles, and become the man you wanted me to be. But this is where I draw the line. No one, not even you, will decide who I marry. I will marry Ola, and I'm not afraid to say that I'm ready to kill for her if I have to. Ezekalisia's eyes widened in shock. His son had never spoken to him in this manner before. What has come over you? He demanded. Love, father. Love came over me, Obidi continued, his voice growing sharper. It's high time you learned who the weak one is between the two of us. It is the man who lets fear rule him. The man who hides behind the mask of strength and power, refusing to face his fears. That man, father, is you. You think I haven't noticed? You spent your entire life running from your fears, masking them with this obsession for control and dominance. But I'm nothing like you. I have no fears because I have faced and defeated them. You dare not speak to me like that, boy, the king roared, his face red with rage. I am your father. Obidi's eyes were like steel as he shot back, his voice unwavering. And I am your son. It is only me who will ever have the balls to tell you the truth. You killed my mother. You think I don't know? You turned her into your punching bag, using your fists to unleash your frustrations until you finally knocked the life out of her. And you stand here and call me weak for loving someone. It is you who are weak. Only weak men are afraid to love, and I am nothing like you. The king was shocked. The accusation hit him like a thunderclap. For a moment, he was speechless. Then, overcome by fury, he raised his hand to strike Obidi, but the prince caught his wrist mid-air, gripping it firmly. I won't give you the pleasure of striking me, father. You know what? Obidi said to his father, his voice low and cold. You lived all your life to be better than your father, but you never actually lived your own life. I tell you, you are just as weak as your father because your driving force is fear. He released his father's arm, stepping back. I am getting married in 7 days. This is not up for debate, he said, his tone final. Without another word, Obidi turned on his heel and left the room, his steps measured and firm. The king stood frozen, staring after him, his mind reeling from the encounter. For the first time in his life, Ezekalisia found himself speechless, unable to respond to the son who had just torn down the image he had spent a lifetime building. Meanwhile, Nonto had been released from the palace prison, but he was in for the shock of his life. When he heard that Prince Obidi intended to marry Ola, he could hardly believe it. His jaw dropped, and his words came out in a stutter. But this wasn't the plan, he muttered, his voice trembling. The prince let out a low, cold laugh, his expression unreadable. Then, his face hardened, and his voice turned sharp. Are you scared, Nonso? Scared you might lose your punching bag? Your slave, your so-called stinking family breadwinner. His anger boiled over, and before Nonso could react, Obidike's fist connected with his face, sending him crashing to the ground. Nonso clutched his jaw, pleading for mercy. I am sorry, my prince. Please forgive me, he whimpered. Obidike stood over him, his voice filled with disgust. That punch was for thinking Ola is worth just 2 million naira. She is worth more than your entire family's miserable existence, fool. You should thank the gods she begged me not to kill you. Otherwise, you wouldn't be right here now. He stepped back, glaring at Nonso. Now listen carefully. I want you to retrieve every single one of her father's properties that you sold. Go back to the buyers and get them back. I don't care how you do it. Beg, work, or grovel for the rest of your life, if you must. Secondly, you and your wretched family will leave Obika's compound immediately. Return to wherever you were before your vile mother wormed her way into that house. Ola will decide what to do with her father's compound. His voice grew colder. You have 7 days. If you fail again, I won't stop at killing you. I will wipe out your entire family. His words landed like a death sentence, leaving Nonso shaking on the ground. Wano and Nkoli could not believe their ears when Nonso broke the news to them. Ola was getting married, and the prince was fighting for her. They had thought she was going to suffer under the tyranny of the harsh prince, but from what was happening, it could only mean one thing. The prince was in love with Ola. Soon, she would be queen. Tears rolled down their faces as they regretted all they had done to her for no just reason. Right now, the gods were punishing them for their sins. Despite their efforts, Nonso and his family were unable to buy back the properties they had sold. Fearful of the prince's wrath, they pleaded with the buyers, who, out of respect for Ola and fear of Obidike, agreed to return the properties. However, there was a condition. Nonso and his family would work as laborers on their farms for 10 years to repay their debts. It was a humiliating fall for them, but they had no choice. Swallowing their pride, they left Obika's compound in shame and returned to their old, dilapidated hut. The once arrogant family was now broken, brought low by their greed and wickedness. The villagers couldn't stop talking about the turn of events. They whispered amongst themselves, their voices filled with satisfaction. That Nwando is truly evil, one woman said. She deserves this. After all she did to Ola, the gods have finally brought justice, another added. For the people of Mbala, it was not just a story of downfall, but a lesson that cruelty and greed always comes with consequences. As for Ola, they believed her new chapter as the prince's bride would bring her the happiness she had long deserved. In a grand and joyous ceremony, Prince Obidike and Ola were joined in matrimony. Despite the short notice, the entire village of Mbala gathered to celebrate the union. The air buzzed with excitement, laughter, and the sound of drums and flutes as the villagers watched their strikingly handsome prince marry the stunning and kind-hearted Ola. The day was filled with colorful displays. delicious feast, and heartfelt blessings from everyone present. Ola was radiant, her beauty magnified by the happiness she felt in her. She had found her Prince Charming through the most unlikely and awkward circumstances. Here she was, standing beside a man who had given her life a new meaning. As she looked at Obidi, her heart swelled with joy. This past few days had been filled with moments she would cherish forever. Who would believe that beyond this tough exterior was the kindest man she had ever met? He had treated her with so much kindness and love that she never thought was possible, and she knew deep in her soul that he would make her the happiest woman alive. As the ceremony unfolded, all eyes turned to the king Eze-Kalisia, who sat on his throne observing his son and new daughter-in-law. For the first time in years, the villagers saw him smile, a genuine warm smile that softened his otherwise stern demeanor. Over the past few days, Eze-Kalisia had taken time to reflect on Obidi's harsh but truthful words. He had come to realize that his son was right. He had spent his entire life living in the shadow of his father's supposed weakness, consumed by a need to prove his strength. But in doing so, he had missed out on truly living his own life. Now, watching his son, Eze-Kalisia saw a man who had the courage to embrace life, love, and his own destiny without fear. This was true strength and power. It filled him with pride. For the first time, he let go of the burdens of his past. He resolved to spend his remaining days in peace, enjoying the happiness his son had found. Prince Obidi and Ola began their married life, surrounded by love and blessings. Their bond grew stronger with time, and Obidi remained as devoted to Ola as he had promised. He adored and cherished her every day, making her dream of being loved and treated like a queen come true. Their happiness was complete when they were blessed with children who brought even more joy to their lives. When Eze-Kalisia passed away, they ruled Mbala with compassion and wisdom. Like his father before him, Obidi ensured that the land remained peaceful and prosperous throughout his reign. But he ruled with an added touch of love that endeared him to his people. Their reign was marked by harmony, fairness, and devotion to the people. And so Obidi and Ola lived happily ever after, their lives a testament to the power of love, courage, and the ability to break free from the chains of fear. Their story became a cherished tale in Mbala, passed down from generation to generation. A story of a prince who found his true strength not in power, but in love. Hey besties, thank you so much for watching this beautiful story, and I hope you enjoyed it. I would like you to share your lessons in the comment section. And if you are yet to subscribe to this channel, please do not skip this video without hitting the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so that you get notified whenever we post new stories. Thank you so much for all your support and beautiful comments. They mean a lot to me. Right now, I'll have to go and see you in our next story. Bye!